so when I went into adulthood, it was a big challenge for me. I came into adulthood very hard because I didn't have a support system. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life and
Right.
really how I was going to support myself. So I worked jobs until I accumulated enough skills to where
Yeah.
I was able to say to myself, I don't have to wait around now for someone else to
Mm.
give me opportunity. Now I can create the opportunity for myself.
Wow.
And that is really where I launched into actually owning my own businesses and starting my own companies. And I've been doing that ever since I was 22 years old.
So welcome to the Meaningful Jobs podcast season 2. I'm your host, Adrian, and today we're extremely honored to welcome Aalia to our podcast. And just a little bit on Aalia, she is an entrepreneur. She has her own production company, but I'm told that her story is a lot more complex than what it seems, on the face of the book. So, how are you doing, Aalia? Hope you're well.
Oh, I'm fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm very excited to have this conversation with you today.
Yeah,
Thank you.
me too. And I guess the question I have to ask you, Alia, is, you mentioned, in your profile that you are, homeless when you were 14. Can you tell us how you, perhaps give us a little bit of a background about yourself and, how you got to where you are at currently?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. Yes, I let people know. I think it's important for people to have a representation of sometimes not the perfect story, right? Most of us don't come from a perfect background, even though we like to give the impression that we do. But in
Mm.
my case, I really, really definitely faced some extraordinary circumstances. When I
Mm.
was 14 years old, I was the child in a family that was very emotionally unintelligent in certain ways.
Right,
And I ended up on my own, and I've been on my own for the most part since I was 14 years old.
right.
And I want to say that I was actually the child of an entrepreneur. My mother was an
Wow.
entrepreneur. At 7 and 8 and 9 years old, I would go into her office and I would
Right,
proofread her brochures, and I
right.
saw what business meant for my family. But yeah, and so when I went into adulthood, it was a big challenge for me. I came into adulthood very hard because I didn't have a support system. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life and
Right.
really how I was going to support myself. So I worked jobs until I accumulated enough skills to where
Yeah.
I was able to say to myself, I don't have to wait around now for someone else to
Mm.
give me opportunity. Now I can create the opportunity for myself.
Wow.
And that is really where I launched into actually owning my own businesses and starting my own companies. And I've been doing that ever since I was 22 years old.
Wow. So were you ever employed at any stage?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I was saying early on, I worked for other people. In fact, I had several jobs when I was younger. And then even going into corporate America,
Mm.
for example, and I say this because I've worked across multiple sectors. I worked in the medical, I've worked in
Right.
retail, not only as an employee working in a retail store, but also owning retail stores.
Right.
I own service companies, and you know, those they were all just building blocks, and when I worked for other companies, what I will tell you, and it's something that we talked a little bit, you mentioned before we got on this, is that, to me, work was, there's a time period where work was a means to an end, right? It was money that I needed to make to pay rent and to put the food on the table and to
Yeah.
get through each month. But then work became my lifestyle, and it became very clear to me that that's what drove me to work for myself, because I wanted to create a quality of life that allowed me to both work but then also be a mom and be a
Right.
wife and be
Right.
happy in what I was doing.
Mm.
So that's kind of how that journey began.
Wow, it's a journey that not a lot of people would have experienced, I think. So, going back to you, the period when you said you were homeless, it seemed like it was a decision from your side to actually find your own support system. Can I say this? It seemed like you were fed up with things when you were young and you decided to venture out. So can you tell us how difficult an experience it has been, to not have a support system from a young age?
Oh, it was, you know, which, in business, you're taught that network is everything, right? Your network is your
Right,
net worth and all these
right,
things.
right,
Fortunately, I wasn't really taught that when I was young. So not having a support system and not understanding that I belonged to a community, whether I recognized it or not, right? Like because of my culture or my background or anything, it was devastating when I was younger, but it also forced me to be more resilient. The choice, it was a choice becoming homeless in a sense, but not really, because my parents, or my mother specifically, because my parents were divorced, was like, if you don't like it here, then get out, and
wow,
like, but don't come back. And
mm,
so I had no support, like, in fact, for a lot of people. And I think that when we talk about the subject of what you're
yeah,
speaking on, the reason I didn't actually go to college right out of
mm,
18, I talk about this all the time, was because I had to work. I had to pay
right,
the rent. I had to
right,
pay the bills. So I had nobody else to do that, right? So
right,
it caused me to not to be able to go to college until after I had
mm,
already built a multi-million-dollar business. And when
oh,
I did it, Adrian, I only went back to prove to everyone I could have done this all along, but it was simply the
right,
opportunity I did not have, right?
right, right,
So it was important for me to, and I graduated cum laude. I've been inducted into honors business societies because of my
yeah,
performance. Very validating, right? But
mhm,
yeah, going back to your question, of course it was difficult, and it took a long time. It took that hard road to learn that, not speaking on the network, but your net worth aspect, but definitely agreeing with the network that you
right,
have in your
right,
life.
right,
It's something you build upon to
mm,
go wherever you're going. And a lot of times I come across people that say, well, I don't really have a network. But going back to what I said earlier, you do, you might not be tapping into it, but
right,
you do, right?
right,
For some people, it's their church. For some people,
yeah,
eventually also for myself, I'm a cancer survivor. So my
right,
cancer community became
wow,
incredibly important to me.
wow.
And those are just the things you look to start tapping into to pull yourself to the next level.
I think there are two key themes in your life that you really care about. The first one is community. The second one is perhaps validation. In terms of community, um, there was a guest that I actually just interviewed, who I was asking her, what's the meaning of work? And she said, you don't have to fit into any community. You have to think about yourself. You have to think about, you can't just be um, controlled, sort of to say, by society or by any community. But for you, it seems the complete opposite. You emphasize the importance of community. And we live in a bit of a culture where it seems like everybody is quite self-centric. Community or family is not as emphasized nowadays as before, perhaps. Um, can you tell us how important you think community is, and what would you say to those who don't think it's that important?
I mean, well, first of all, I love what you said earlier a moment ago, and I would agree that the minute, like, I love the story. There's the
Mm,
reason a bee. There's, what is it? Hold on, I'm mischaracterizing the quote, but
no problem.
bees do not take, or excuse me, bees do not take the time to explain to a fly why
Mhm.
flowers are better than
Oh,
shit, right?
that's a
Like,
long quote. That's a long quote.
it's but the emphasis is that when you really believe in what you are meant to do and what you are trying to do, definitely don't let someone in your community tell you, you can't do this, or that you're not good enough to do that, or whatever the case is. Whenever somebody tells me I can't do something, I'm gonna say, thank you so much. You just showed me your limitations, but you did not show me mine, right?
Right.
And so I do believe that community can support you. I think that humanity, especially now, I mean, if we really want to talk about our current state as well as our future and our predictions, the there's scientists saying that by 2050, 1 billion people will be displaced, either because of wars or climate change or financial crisis. These are real numbers and real people that are part of communities. And whether we recognize it or not, we are part of a community. So while I will agree that you should never allow anyone to tell you who you are and what you can achieve, or which you can't achieve, to be honest, even in that level, it's still very important, because I'm going to predict that things are going to get tougher. And as they are, we're going to have to lean on one another. And I say that when you say things like, I don't need a community, and I'm not saying that that's how she said it, or if you are a person who's like, well, I don't owe the world anything, and I don't really have to think about my community. I think that's wrong. When you get married and you grow up and you have kids and they go to a school, you're part of a community. When you work at a place, you are part of a community. You can grow up or be younger and get sick and find yourself, I was 28 years old dealing with cancer, and at 30, I was laying in a hospital bed wondering if I was going to see my kids grow up. In that moment, Adrian, community meant everything to me, right? So I think that for some people, it's the state of life that they're in that says, okay, well, I don't have to really worry about what's happening in the world. I can just put my head in the sand and only focus on myself. But I think that that's a very dangerous thing to do, not only for yourself, but also the example that we're showing to others in our homes and in our workplaces, as well as back into our community, the grocery store, everywhere, right? Everywhere that we go.
I'd love to ask you a little bit more about, maybe like your experience with cancer and how you started your businesses, shortly after this. But I think you'll agree that, there are good and bad communities. So how do you determine which is good and which isn't?
I think that vibrations is a real thing. Your gut instinct will tell you when you are in danger, when you are in a situation that's not right. And I think that that's one of the most often missed upon opportunities, when we can listen to ourselves and we're not. I mean, I agree with you. There are not every community out there is good for you, but it is up to us. We have the moral compass. We have, energy. And I think that if a lot of people don't believe this, well, I shouldn't say a lot of people, because I haven't gone and asked everyone, but so I'll leave it to this. I think there are those that don't understand that when they look up at success, quote unquote, successful people, successful companies, right? They are all buying into, the most successful of them are buying into the ideology of vibrations, of the meaning of the things that you do, how all of those impact the overall experience and outcomes. So if they're doing it, why wouldn't we do it? Why wouldn't we listen to our intuition? Why wouldn't we pay attention when something doesn't feel right? Because those are our guiding factors on whether we should be exiting stage left or whether we should be staying around and being included,
So, a little bit about your experience with cancer. Was that before? I think you started a business already when you were 20, before you then had cancer, right? So can you tell us a little bit how you started your business and what happened afterwards when you had cancer?
So my first ever business, I was actually in the music industry, and I would get clients. So I had DJs and I was doing music. But my first professional, and I'll say this one because it was probably the one that's the best example, I actually started with a marketing letter, right? I started it from the living room of my home, my apartment even, and I had developed a team of certain people. I knew how to write an effective letter. I pulled out the Yahoo pages at the time.
That was
and
before
I made a
ChatGPT.
list. Well, I did a circumference of every single, at that time I owned a medical billing company, and I wanted to acquire clients. So, I pulled out that phone book, if you will, and I pulled a 3-mile perimeter. There was 300 physicians within a 3-mile perimeter at the time, and I sent out 300 letters. Now, 3 of those became my clients within the first 30 days. And within 3 years, I sold that company for profit to another larger, that, got acquired by a larger medical billing company. But it started with knowing what's going to attract people, right? Like knowing how to accurately market to your target demographic what matters to them. So the quality of the service, saying to them, this isn't some big company that you're going to get lost in. This is going to give you attention. This is going to give you care. And we're going to absolutely give the focus to your organization. And then the third thing, which was very, very critical in marketing, Adrian, was giving them a financial incentive. Saying, hey, if you do this within this time frame, then you're going to save X amount of dollars. And that is what got me those first 3 clients, as well as my ability to show that I had something unique I could offer. We did it, we pulled it off. Now, I sold that business, and then actually I had retail stores when I did get sick. That was very challenging. It was challenging to be sick, to be going through treatment, to be going through, even minor surgeries that I had to go through, and still be a mom and run businesses. But it's at those times that you really want to champion within your organizations. I was very transparent. I let my team know what was happening. Right. I'm very grateful that I had built a community, even within our organization, I had built a community with our employees so that they wanted to support me and our family as we went through this, And
sorry, were you still running your business when you were suffering from cancer, or did you have
I was.
Wow,
100%, really? full time, multiple stores too. We had multiple stores, we had several employees, and that was a lot because aside from me being sick, I had, this is the thing I see about when you own a business. You don't just own a business. You are supporting people's abilities to pay their rent, to feed their children, right? To put gas in their car and food on their table. So the responsibility of owning a business and having employees is huge. And at that time, I had to make sure that my organizations or my businesses could still perform so that those things are not impacted. So I am grateful that I was able to do that still. I, again, always engage my marketing skills and things that made it stand out. I think at times when I was tough, you know what, Adrian, I'll tell you, I reached more to the community to do for them. So I have this belief when I really want something from the universe, I recognize that I need to go do more for people.
Right.
Okay. Right. Because it's you get out of life what you put into it. And I felt like, so for example, one of the things that we did is I remember it was Thanksgiving, and one of my stores was in Compton, California. Actually, a large portion of our stores were in economically challenged areas throughout California, as well as Texas and Phoenix. And for Thanksgiving, I remember in our Compton store at that time, I said, we're going to do a turkey giveaway, and we're just going to buy 10 turkeys, and we're going to give these away to customers. And, what that did was made them feel like you guys are not so self-centric, so focused on yourselves. You're focused on us, that it of course, it increased the devotion. It increased our stance within the community because they saw that we're not just here to sell you something. We actually want to give you something. We want to make you feel like we care. So for me, when I was sick, and this is just being very honest, it was more important to me than ever to show our community that we cared and we understood that things happen and challenges. And I ran those businesses during recessions, the 2000 recession, 2008 recession. These were times when people were struggling. So to be able to come out and say, okay, we want to do something for you, and then it showed our employees. So we were able to culminate a lot of devotion, loyalty, support, because of the way that we ran our business, at least the way that I ran the business, for sure.
Wow. I can't imagine, the amount of stress you must be under, having your own health in peril, and also, having to run a business, which is really difficult in normal circumstances. And, on top of that, you mentioned about the importance of helping others, especially when you're in need of something, which can be quite counterintuitive for a lot of people. Can you tell us how this works?
I mean, it's an energy, it's a belief in like a karma meter, right? And you fill it up. I mean, I don't know how other to explain it than that, to just say, again, when I really need something, look, I will go down to downtown LA and I will stand and feed the homeless myself at times. I think it's a quid pro quo. It's a quid pro quo in the belief that if you want something, you have to give it. It's an exchange of energy. It's an exchange of compassion and commitment and showing up for the world the way that you want the world to show up for you. You know what I mean? That's pretty much that's the best way that I could describe it at this moment. And I would encourage, again, going back to the comment that I said, a little bit ago, 2050, it's so critical. We see people suffering. We know that that's happening. So it's not going to get better. It's going to continue. And I'm not saying that the world is ending. That's actually not what I'm trying to say. I believe in humanity. I believe in our resilience, but
Right.
there are multiple things within systems, within the education system, within the financial system, within the, the banking, everything, the climate change that are impacting our world. So I think that if you don't have the belief that what you get out of this universe is based on what you give to it, then you might be a person who later on is like, well, why doesn't anything happen for me? Why does, I'll say, I've spoken to people who are trying to build, I'm going to kind of shift to their social media, right? They'll say, well, I go on and I put posts and
Yeah.
I don't understand why my page is just not blowing up. And it's like, okay, but what are you doing, right? Because it's an exchange of currency, social digital currency that exists. And the way that the algorithm works on, as you know, on social media, if you're not active, if you're not going and looking at other people's lives, then you're just sitting there selfishly expecting everything to come to you. And it does not always work like that. Rarely does it work like that. Like there is a formula, and that's not part of the recipe to just sit back and think. I mean, listen, even if I want to win the lotto, I got to get my butt up off the chair and go buy the ticket, right? Nothing's happening for me just instantaneously.
Right.
So that's kind of, that's how I lead my organizations. And that's how I have throughout the years mentored other people to be.
I think you've got like an inborn knack of being a great marketer, and you've never actually had, formal education, but you've gained this marketing skill that gave you the ability to build successful businesses. So can you tell us a little bit about how you actually gained marketing skills? How does it come so naturally to you?
So I think that early on, understanding psychology, understanding that people want to be incentivized. I always saw that. As a kid, I would go knocking on doors and asking for food and money to give to, help centers during holidays and things like that. And as far as the marketing, it's just, I was very aware of how I am. And I did eventually go, obviously, I, have my Bachelor of Science. Eventually I went to college, I went to law school, but like, yes, early on, just understanding that most people are incentivized by money, first of all. So it's, most, but also the quality of what they're getting and receiving. I knew that having worked for somebody, I also marketed to my own employees, like at the time, like knowing that I would want to work in a place that I feel valued and cared about and have opportunity, things like that. So, knowing that I like those things, why would I not then also extend them to other people? And I think to some degree, it also came from being homeless, because you learn really quick. I don't want to say, some people misinterpret this word hustle. You're a hustler, like you're doing something corrupt, or you're being shady. It's like, no, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being on the hustle and having a hustle and a drive that makes you, and scrappy. Like that's the other thing that made me really good at marketing, was understanding scrappy, in the sense of like, I will, do what needs to be done, and I can do it in a very resourceful way. Because when you are homeless and you don't have a lot of money and you don't have a lot of things, and like we said before, I didn't have a huge network, you become very resourceful. And resourceful is hand in hand with marketing, because once you really understand marketing, you know that you're trying to get into the head of your target audience or target, customer, and unlocking the thing that makes them say, gosh, I think I really need this, or I think I really want this, and I just saw that very early. And part of it, like I said, was having a mother that was an entrepreneur and seeing that, she sold services. But funny enough, I did better than her.
Well, not surprising, maybe. But I also want to ask you about how you came about setting up your current business, which is called Unsugarcoated Media, a really interesting name. Can you tell us a little bit about how you set this up?
Yeah, Unsugarcoated Media, I actually decided, I took a very different turn with Unsugarcoated Media, because most of my businesses, well, all of my businesses were really truly for-profit businesses.
Yeah.
I had come to a life, I had exited out of Metro PCS, as I had shared with you before we got on, in 2014. And I was really, for the next couple of years, in a place where I could do what I wanted, really truly what I wanted, for the first time in a long time. And I knew that I wanted to be really indulge those creative senses that I had funny enough, from all the marketing, right? Like,
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
and so Unsugared Coated Media is a 501c3 media production enterprise. We
yeah,
look to create social impact through storytelling. We
yeah,
do events, documentaries. We are also working on films. We do book publishing as well. And all of our focus is in this big way, really to help survivors of trauma. And in 2019, Adrian, when I said survivors of trauma, people were like, well, that's kind of vague. But then we went through this collective trauma together through a pandemic, and
yeah,
suddenly everyone is aware, oh, okay, yeah, trauma is a real thing. Trauma has
yeah,
impacted our society. And
yeah,
honestly, we just look to really be a leader in a different type of media company. We are focused on positive. We are focused on supporting humanity and
yeah.
making a difference instead of just being part of the propaganda machine that most people see media as. So we
Mm,
stand out in that way, and we're also a teaching organization because we mostly are supported by USC interns that are master's
yeah.
students as well as undergrads,
Mm,
and they come to learn about a meaningful job. They come to learn about infusing or, having a workspace that's both, the day to day, but then also with that meaning, with that
right,
ability
right.
to make an impact in the world. And it's been amazing. It's been
I feel
amazing.
like
And
sorry, I
sorry.
just feel like they have to tune into our podcast because
Yeah.
it's we have the same title, and I guess I really feel happy when people are um thinking of getting a meaningful job instead of just thinking about money or reputation or what they can get for themselves, because that's what drive people unhappy. But a lot of people don't realize this. So, you know, can you tell us a bit more about how you help these students find meaning in what they do?
No, thank you so much. Yeah, and I love, so during 2020 when we launched, we had an internship program, but we really extended it during the pandemic, and it was the most amazing thing to have interns in Hong Kong, Taiwan, New York,
Oh,
Virginia. All of them had been sent home and said, we can't do anything for you, right? Like that was the experience. Go home, do homework from your closet if you have to, whatever the case is.
mm,
But what I was so honored and thankful for was the opportunity to provide internships to them to where they learned something. And you know what they learned? They learned that no matter where I am at in the world and no matter what circumstances I am going through, I can still make a positive impact. I can still do things. I have a voice. And largely a lot of that does come from the marketing. They recognize when they see the results of what they're doing, or we curate a season of our own podcast and
yeah.
they become award nominated because I include them in our submissions and I want them to get that credit. So, it's a beautiful thing to be able to show them, because a lot of them come to me with that, like, we like the idea of being able to work and learn the things that you need in a traditional job, learning how to set
Mhm.
up your email, learning all these things, learning those real world, but also at the same token, seeing the results, seeing the feedback, knowing that Unsugared Coated Media has helped transform people's lives through some of our work, that
Mhm.
they be part of that. It's wonderful. A lot of our team has been international. So the only thing that's sad is some of them, they finish their term and then they have to go home.
Yeah.
But I'm always honored to know that I have at least created a brick and a foundation in the belief system that, like you said, they can do something meaningful and as well create a career for themselves.
So just lastly, before we end, I want to ask you about your own experience, because you didn't go to school because you had to work to pay your rent and put food on the table. But then, I guess it's a blessing in disguise that you then had to make more money by setting up a business and turned out to be really successful. Um, would you, oh, well, how would you recommend people, or high school students in particular, after graduating from high school, um, would you recommend them to continue their studies, or should they start looking for a job, set up their businesses? What would be your recommendation?
My recommendation is based on the person. And I will say this. So even with my own kids, I'm a mother of 4 and a grandmother at this point in my life. I have told all of my kids that or, if you go to college, if you want to wait, that's fine. I didn't go to college until I was closer to 30. My husband also didn't go to law school until he was 30 years old. So we were both kind of late bloomers because we were getting that work experience. I'm going to tell you an advantage that I had
Yeah.
over others who went to college right out of school. So when I did go for a job interview, I would go up against some people who did have a master's degree, but they had zero work experience. When I was able to go into an interview, and because I had been spending that time getting the work experience, I would get picked over the person with a master's, even with no degree at that time, simply because of my work experience. I already knew the solutions to the problems that they needed to solve. I already had that work ethic built in. I knew what needed to be done, and I could immediately, I was like a turnkey employee. Whereas when you're getting somebody straight out of college and they lack that real world experience, you have to work with them. There's that mentoring. And that's actually what I do enjoy now about what we do with Unsugared Coated Media. But when I was younger, I was glad to be that turnkey employee. So as far as what I would recommend, and again, I didn't go back to college, or I didn't go to college until after I had already made, and I'm not being facetious, I'm not like trying to blow something up, and no, genuinely, I had already made $1 million. I had built a $1 million generating business, multiple $1 million generating business at that time. And then I went to college. So, my belief is that college does not make or break you.
Yeah.
You can accomplish what you need to do. However, if you want to study something, or if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, obviously, then college is at some point going to be in your future. But what I would say is this, and I'm telling you this being a 48-year-old woman, right? I just turned 48 June 30th.
You don't look like 48.
Thank you.
A lot younger.
Thank you. Well, but the point is like, and that's the point. See, when I was 20, I thought 48 was so old. I thought, oh my gosh, you are near retirement. Now,
even 20-year-olds think 20 years old.
Exactly. So the point is, stop thinking like that. Stop thinking that you can't, that, it's one or the other. My mentor, who I love and adore, I have to give him a shout out. His name is Larry Namer. He's the co-founder of E Entertainment. He's 70 something years old, and this man is still just launching projects. He is as busy as me. And even for me, I think, well, shoot, if I'm 48, 70 something, I've got a big window on like, what could I still accomplish? So I think the real shift in what I would like to say to anybody, whatever they're considering straight out of high school, is doing what's right for you. Because at this stage, college is very expensive. My husband is a lawyer, but he's got a couple $100,000 in student debt that, it's a big burden to carry. So you really should know what you want to do before you really pull the lever and go incur all that debt because that was one of the reasons why I was able to have businesses, Adrian, because I didn't have much debt sitting on my shoulders. So I could, and I would always, I will say this, I always had more than one job. Even if I had a client, I always did more than one thing, or I'd have more than one client, obviously. But my recommendation is what's going to be best for you, but stop thinking that it has to be that or the other. Stop thinking that you don't have time, and stop thinking, even though I know time is something that we all don't know if we have, but assuming you're going to live, hopefully, a long and productive life, just know that some of those decisions don't have to be made right at that moment, and you will still be okay. Like, that's one of the things that I really, really want to emphasize, because it is not and some of us, I want to ask you, I'm going to switch this around, it's like, for how many people do you know that they're just going to college to satisfy a parent or this belief?
A lot, because I come from an Asian background. It's if you don't go to college, it's you've got a lot of psychological pressure from your parents. As because Asian parents, they put a lot more emphasis, I guess, compared to other parents from other races, about money and privilege and reputation, which is quite toxic to some extent. So I would say a lot. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but on the flip side, actually, and I would say this about American culture, there is a lot of expectation to go to college, right? Like, I mean, I was expected to go to college. By no means would I have been the first person in my family to go to college. My family, everyone was, they were successful. My mom went to college, all of that. So it wasn't that there was an expectation, but I think in this day and age, and especially with the financial crisis that not only people are experiencing, but then the cost of education, it's
Right.
more of, even if the expectation is there, how is it going to happen,
Mhm.
right? Even if you are a family who wants your child to go to college, can you actually pay for them to go to college? Or is the person going to be completely reliant upon themselves to go to college? And when it is yourself, then sometimes that's not always an option, right? Not all of us have college funds sitting there ready for us to go. So I think that it's smart to be open to the idea that you don't have to go to college to be successful. And I'm aware culturally, because I also come from cultures that are like, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, my ex-husband, he had to have a degree. Even though he made $1 million, he still had to have the degree just so his family could say, well, my son has a degree, right? Because it
Right.
just seems so foreign to think, how could he be successful without having gone to college?
Mhm.
So it's a big conversation, and I think it's okay. um I'm aware of the pressure and I'm aware of
Yeah.
those beliefs, but I just want to say there's more than one way to skin a cat.
Mm.
you know
Well, thank you so much, for the interview. It's been amazing. One of the best interviews I think I've had, and all the best to what you do.
Thank you so much, Adrian. I really had fun with you, and I appreciate and keep doing the amazing work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you.